Have you ever been accused of something, not because of what you did, but because of what you look like? This is the story of Danielle Moore, a quiet black technician who walked into a millionaire's mansion to fix a smart home system, and walked out having exposed a powerful man, dismantled a legacy of discrimination, and sparked a movement that changed lives across the country. It all started with a crying baby, a missing headset, and one woman who chose to stand her ground when the world expected her to stay silent. What followed was not just a fight for justice. It was a masterclass in grace, truth, and unstoppable transformation. Stay with us until the end, because this isn't just a story, it's a wake-up call. Danielle Moore adjusted her service badge as the biometric gate of the Caldwell estate slid open with a low, mechanical hum. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the sprawling Austin hillside, reflecting off the polished steel curves of the millionaire's smart mansion. She had worked in dozens of high-end homes, but something about this place, the sterile perfection, the silence, felt less like a home and more like a showroom for someone trying to prove a point. Dressed in a navy blue tech jumpsuit with a sleek tablet in hand, Danielle was here not as a cleaner, but as a certified smart home technician, a job she took pride in, though she rarely got the respect that came with it. Her task this morning was to recalibrate the voice command security system that had been glitching for days. Standard procedure: in, out, and gone before lunch. Or so she thought. The front door opened without greeting. Inside, polished marble floors stretched beneath a grand glass staircase, and recessed lighting shimmered against chrome-paneled walls. The house was silent. Eerily so. No music, no television, no human voice. Only the soft clicking of Danielle's boots echoed as she stepped into the heart of the mansion. "Hello?" she called, professionally but cautiously. No reply. A brief scan of her work order confirmed the client. Ethan Caldwell, owner, present during appointment. She moved toward the central hub, an embedded wall tablet, to run diagnostics. As she tapped through the interface, she noticed several systems were offline. Security cameras hadn't been syncing. Voice assistants weren't responding. Temperature controls were locked. It wasn't the first time she'd seen this, a system that had been overridden, tampered with, or simply ignored. But before she could finish a single sweep, a sharp voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Where the hell is my Vision Pro?" Danielle turned slowly. A tall, sharply dressed man, in an ironed white shirt and slacks, stood at the edge of the hallway, fists clenched. His brow was furrowed, and his tone wasn't one of confusion. It was accusation. "Excuse me?" she said calmly, setting her tablet down. "Your what?" "My Apple Vision Pro. It was on the living room console." "It's not there now," the man snapped. "You were the only person in the house today, right?" She blinked. "I only arrived 20 minutes ago. I haven't even been in your living room yet. Don't play games with me." His voice lowered, more dangerous now. "That headset costs $4,000. You people think you can just walk in and help yourself to whatever you want?" The phrase hit like a slap. "You people." Danielle straightened her shoulders, steadying her voice. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm here in a professional capacity. I don't touch anything outside my assignment. Really? Then how do you explain the missing equipment? Perhaps you misplaced it." "I don't misplace things. I run one of the most successful tech firms in this city." He was pacing now, agitated, as though her presence alone was an insult. "I'm calling the service company and the police." Danielle remained still, not out of fear, but out of long-trained composure. This wasn't the first time someone mistook her calm professionalism for submission. It was never about the object. It was always about the power. But before another word could be exchanged, a sound shattered the tension. A baby's cry, high-pitched and frantic, coming from somewhere down the hall. Danielle's eyes instinctively flicked toward the noise. It was sharp, desperate, not the whimpering of a hungry infant, but the scream of a child neglected, frightened. "Your son," she murmured, taking a step in the direction of the cry. "The nanny handles that," Ethan snapped. "Let's get back to the headset." But the crying only grew louder. Danielle hesitated. Protocol told her to stay focused. Humanity told her otherwise. "Excuse me, Mr. Caldwell," she said, walking past him without permission. "This won't take a minute." She opened the door to what she assumed was a nursery and froze. The scene was heartbreaking. A tiny boy, no older than 6 months, lay in a high-tech crib with built-in monitors and temperature control, but no machine could replace presence. His diaper was soaked, his cheeks flushed, eyes swollen from crying. He reached up toward her with trembling fingers, gasping sobs between hiccuping breaths. "Hey there, sweetheart," Danielle whispered, her voice softening instantly. She crossed the room, gently picking him up. "Let's get you cleaned up." The baby curled into her chest as if he had known her for years. Within seconds, the crying ceased. The tension evaporated. Only a gentle coo remained. She changed him quickly, expertly. Years of helping raise her nephews guiding her hands. The sound of heavy footsteps behind her signaled Ethan's return. He stood at the doorway, stunned. "What the hell are you doing?" Danielle looked up. "Comforting your son." "Put him down, now." She hesitated, then handed the baby to him with deliberate care. But the moment Leo left her arms, the wails resumed, louder, more guttural. Ethan rocked him awkwardly. Nothing helped. "Why did he stop crying for you?" he asked, shaken. "Babies feel energy," she replied. He could sense I wasn't angry or tense. Ethan stared at her, the accusatory edge in his eyes blunted by confusion. For a second, she saw something shift. Curiosity, perhaps even guilt. But just as quickly, his ego intervened. "How convenient," he sneered. "The woman who takes my device also happens to be a baby whisperer. What a story." Danielle didn't flinch. Not this time. Her voice remained level, her gaze unwavering. "You're welcome to check my tools, check my bag, call the police. But let me make one thing clear." Her tone cut through the air like a courtroom gavel. "I did not take anything from you. And if you're going to accuse me based on assumption, you better be ready to prove it." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in a long time, someone didn't cower. She walked past him, calm as a surgeon, placing the baby monitor on the console with precision. "Check the cameras, review the footage. You'll find the truth. You always do, if you bother looking." Then she picked up her tablet and resumed her job, like someone who had nothing to fear and everything to fight for. Danielle had just begun recalibrating the central console when Ethan's voice boomed once again from the hallway, louder and more agitated than before. "You haven't heard the last of this. I've already called Elite Tech Services and reported your behavior." She didn't flinch, didn't even glance his way. She'd learned long ago that when power meets insecurity, noise is its armor. "Good," she replied steadily without looking up. "They'll confirm I've worked with you for 6 weeks without a single complaint. Until today." Ethan stormed closer, stopping just a few feet from her. "Open your bag," he demanded, jabbing a finger toward the satchel beside her tools. "I won't ask again." Danielle calmly turned to face him, her eyes cool and composed. "Do you have probable cause, Mr. Caldwell? Or are you simply uncomfortable because someone like me doesn't shrink when accused?" He scoffed. "Oh, don't make this about race. This is about trust." "Exactly," she said, her voice calm but surgical. "And it's interesting that your trust failed the moment something went missing, and I was the only black woman in the room." His jaw tightened. He wasn't prepared for that level of clarity. Most people would have backpedaled, apologized vaguely, tried to reset the conversation. But Danielle didn't grant him that luxury. "You're making this worse for yourself," he muttered, dialing on his phone again. "I want this all on the record." "Perfect," she said, reaching into her tablet settings and activating her own voice recorder. "Let's both keep records then." Her voice echoed slightly in the quiet room, as if the walls themselves had turned to listen. The tension in the air was thick enough to slice through. Suddenly from the hallway, the baby's cry began again, higher, angrier, and more desperate. Danielle turned her head instinctively, then back to Ethan. "Still no nanny?" she asked. "Still blaming the technician for what's missing while your own child begs for comfort?" His face flushed, but before he could answer, her phone buzzed. A message from her sister Carmen. "Martinez says he'll call you in 10. He's checking footage access now." Danielle's fingers hovered over the screen as she stared at Ethan, who was now pacing like a lion in a glass cage, furious but trapped in uncertainty. "You know what your problem is?" he said, finally stopping. "You people come in here thinking you're owed something. That attitude is poison." The words slipped out of his mouth with such ease, like a well-rehearsed script from a boardroom where everyone else looked like him. Danielle stood up slowly, her frame small compared to his, but her posture radiated steel. "I come in here because I'm qualified, because I've earned every certification, every contract, and every ounce of experience that got me through this door." Her voice didn't rise. It deepened, carried by history. "And I don't need anything from you, Mr. Caldwell, except the truth." Just then, the security intercom chimed. "Mr. Caldwell," came the voice of the front gate assistant, "there are 2 police officers here. You requested assistance?" Ethan straightened, glancing at Danielle as if victory was finally arriving in uniform. "Send them up," he said smugly, then turned back toward her. "Now we'll see who's been lying." Danielle didn't move. "I'm looking forward to it," she said. "Just make sure they check the garage cameras, too." He frowned, unsure how to interpret her confidence. "Why?" "Because that's where you lost your headset," she said with a slight smile. "Under your Tesla, last night. Around 11:45 p.m., you dropped it while juggling your briefcase and phone." His face drained of color, but he recovered quickly. "That's a very specific theory." "It's not a theory," she replied. "It's what the footage will show." A long pause passed between them before the sound of a knock echoed from the front door. Ethan opened it to reveal 2 uniformed officers, Detective Alan Rodriguez and Detective Julia Benton, both experienced, both perceptive. "We received a report of a potential theft," Benton began. "Can we speak to both of you?" "Absolutely," Ethan said, stepping aside and motioning toward Danielle with smug relief. "She's the technician. She was alone with the system for over half an hour. My Vision Pro is gone." Rodriguez pulled out a notepad. "Miss, may we speak with you alone after this?" "Of course," Danielle said. "And I'd like to request access to the building's internal camera logs." "Already ahead of you," said Benton, who'd apparently received a dispatch update. "Building security flagged something unusual. Mind if we verify your claim, Mr. Caldwell?" Ethan nodded quickly, though his eyes began darting, not with excitement, but with a flicker of concern. As Rodriguez stepped aside to place a call to security, Benton asked Danielle quietly, "Do you consent to a search of your personal bag?" Danielle unzipped it herself, revealing tools, wires, and a tightly organized layout that mirrored her personality. Precise, deliberate, accountable. "Feel free." Benton scanned the contents, then zipped it back. "Thank you, nothing unusual here." Rodriguez returned, holding up a phone. "They're sending us the video now. Surveillance confirms Miss Moore arrived at 9 a.m. sharp and hasn't left. Meanwhile, at 11:45 p.m. Last night, we have footage of you, Mr. Caldwell, exiting your vehicle in the garage. You dropped something that appears to reflect light under your car." Ethan's eyes widened. That could be anything?" "Actually," Rodriguez said, holding up a clear evidence bag just handed to him by another officer at the door, "it was this." Inside the bag was the missing Apple Vision Pro, scuffed slightly but intact. "Found it under the driver's side of your Tesla Model S." Danielle didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply turned to Ethan and said, "Anything else you'd like to report, sir?" But the look on Ethan's face wasn't fury anymore. It was fear. Not just of what he'd lost, but of who he'd underestimated. A's. The officers stepped aside to finish processing their report. Ethan Caldwell stood rooted in the center of his gleaming foyer, his entire sense of control peeling away like paint in a fire. Danielle Moore quietly packed up her tablet, methodically slipping wires and tools back into their compartments, like a surgeon cleaning after a successful operation. She didn't speak, didn't look at him, because she didn't need to. The silence now spoke louder than his earlier accusations. But then, Ethan, like so many men whose power was never truly tested until it was threatened, couldn't bear the weight of his own humiliation. "This doesn't change anything," he muttered, his voice uneven. "You still walked around my house, touched my kid, acted like you belonged here." Danielle turned slowly, her movements deliberate, as if even her silence carried meaning. "I acted like a human being," she said at last, "which clearly is more than you're used to." Ethan's face twitched, but Danielle wasn't done. She took 2 steps toward him, not aggressively, but with the certainty of someone who had carried truths for far too long. "You know, I've been in hundreds of homes like this one," she said, her voice calm but laced with a quiet edge. "Same marble floors, same overpriced furniture, same men who look at me and see only what they want to believe. A stereotype, a shadow in a uniform. Someone who must have come from nothing and will return to nothing when they say so." Ethan looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "But you all make the same mistake," she continued. "You think because someone's in your home to fix your wires, or scrub your glass, or cradle your crying child while you're busy yelling about a misplaced toy, that they're beneath you, disposable, forgettable, Invisible. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with restrained history. But here's the thing, Mr. Caldwell. I'm not just someone you hired. I'm someone who sees. I see the way your kid flinches when voices are raised. I see the empty wine glass in the hallway at 9 a.m. I see the nanny that doesn't exist. And I see you, a man so desperate to keep his power, he'll accuse a stranger of theft just to feel in control for 5 more minutes. Ethan took a shaky breath. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I jumped to conclusions, but I didn't know your background. I didn't know. You didn't care, Danielle cut in, not unkindly but truthfully. And that's the difference. You never asked my name when I walked in. Never looked me in the eye until you thought I stole from you. Because to you, I didn't exist. Until I became a problem. She picked up her bag and turned toward the door. But before she could reach it, Ethan's phone buzzed, again and again. Then a third time. He hesitated, glanced at the screen, and froze. A name popped up. Private Investigator Martinez. Danielle smiled faintly, finally turning to him. You might want to take that. It's going to change your day. He answered the call with trembling fingers. Hello? There was silence on the other end for a beat too long. Then a low voice replied, Mr. Caldwell, this is Detective Martinez. We need to talk. It's about your wife. Ethan's face went pale. What? What do you mean? She's not in Miami, sir, the detective said. She's been in Las Vegas for 3 weeks, with someone else. Ethan stumbled backward slightly, the opulence of the room suddenly closing in like a coffin. No, that's impossible. Not impossible, Martinez said calmly. Just very well hidden, until now. As Ethan's world crumbled in real time, Danielle's phone buzzed too. It was her sister Carmen. He's panicking. Martinez says he's got full footage, and the legal team is ready if needed. Danielle texted back a simple 2-word reply. Thank you. She didn't gloat, she didn't smile, she simply walked to the door with the same grace she'd walked in with. Measured, firm, unshakable. But Ethan wasn't done. Not yet. You think this gives you power? He spat suddenly, voice cracking. You think exposing me makes you better? Danielle stopped in the doorway. No, she said softly. I don't need to be better than you. I just need to be enough to never let people like you erase me again. Her words didn't echo. They landed. Heavy. Final. And then she was gone. Ethan stood there, alone now, not just in the house, but in a collapsing life built on assumptions and privilege. And as the baby began crying again in the next room, he suddenly realized he didn't even know how to comfort his own son. That the woman he had tried to humiliate had done more for his child in 10 minutes than he had in 6 months. And that this story, the one he tried to control, was no longer his to tell. It belonged to her now, and she was just getting started. Danielle stepped out into the Texas sun like someone walking out of a courtroom after delivering the closing argument of a lifetime. Not because she was vindicated, but because she had already known the outcome the moment she walked into that house. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The door to Ethan Caldwell's illusion had shut itself. As she walked through the gated driveway toward her parked car, her phone rang again, this time with a number she hadn't seen in years. Monica Santos? Said a familiar voice on the other end. Danielle paused and smiled. I haven't heard that name since Jamaica. Well, it still carries weight here, said the man, Detective Martinez, her old mentor from her private investigator days. And so do you. She got into her car and closed the door, her hands steady on the steering wheel, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Tell me what you found, she said. Martinez didn't disappoint. Caldwell's company has a record of 3 racial discrimination and complaints in the past 5 years, all settled quietly with gag orders. 2 of the complainants were women of color, both accused of misconduct without proof. Sound familiar? Danielle's eyes narrowed. Keep going. His wife's affair is the least of his problems. The IRS has been sniffing around too. Unreported assets, off-book bonuses to certain executives. Looks like the empire's starting to rot from within. Danielle let that sink in for a moment, her mind piecing together a puzzle that didn't just involve a headset or a false accusation. This was a pattern, a systemic rot masked in modern tech luxury, a plantation in silicon and chrome. She pulled into a small coffee shop a few blocks away, the same place she used to sit with a cracked laptop when applying for her security certifications. The barista still remembered her and gave a nod. Still saving the world, Miss Moore? Just trying to keep it honest, she replied, settling into the back booth. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her sister Carmen. Also found a parenting blog Ethan's wife contributed to. There's a comment from a user named MotherLionTX. Says she had to hire a private nanny last minute because daddy was too busy delegating everything including fatherhood. Danielle exhaled. That explained the child. That explained the empty nursery. The cries, the instinctive flinch of a baby left to machines and white noise. Carmen, she texted back, save that comment. I have a feeling it'll be useful soon. She turned her attention back to Martinez. I want full legal access to the building's surveillance footage. I want every digital trace of that headset. The purchase, the serial code, even where it pinged last. And Martinez, I need one more favor. Name it. I want you to connect me with Dr. Patricia Williams, the civil rights attorney. There was a pause. You're going big. No, Danielle said, eyes sharpening. I'm going correct. Across town, Ethan Caldwell sat on the edge of his leather couch, surrounded by things that could no longer protect him. Designer rugs, oil paintings of nothing, a refrigerator that sent text messages. His baby had fallen asleep after hours of crying. The silence now mocked him. His phone lay face down beside him, vibrating nonstop with texts from his executive assistant, his lawyer, his board members. None of them knew what to do, and neither did he. He picked up the Apple Vision Pro, now back in his possession, and stared at it like it was evidence from a crime scene. The device hadn't moved, but he had, or rather, been moved, by the force of a truth he never expected to encounter inside his own smart home. She may have proven she didn't steal it, he muttered, but she's still just... The words trailed off. He couldn't even say it anymore, because suddenly it didn't feel true. Suddenly, calling her just a technician felt like the greatest lie in a mansion full of them. Back at the coffee shop, Danielle received a call from Dr. Williams. Miss Moore? The lawyer's tone was warm but firm. Martinez just filled me in. I've handled 3 previous cases involving Caldwell's company. You, however, are different. Because I recorded everything? Danielle asked. Because you never once reacted emotionally, Dr. Williams replied. You handled a volatile, humiliating situation with complete control. That's very hard to dismantle in court. Good, Danielle said, sipping her coffee. Because this isn't about a headset. It's about how people like him think they can rewrite the narrative because they have money and Wi-Fi. Williams let out a low chuckle. I've been waiting to take someone like him to court with a witness like you. Danielle's tablet lit up with a notification. Footage from Caldwell's garage has been secured. Clear visual of object dropping under vehicle. Timestamp matches his return from a dinner meeting. Evidence. Unshakable. Cold. Clear. This time, Danielle said aloud to herself, the story won't be rewritten, it'll be recorded. She stood up, buttoned her coat, and stepped outside. The Texas sun was setting behind the skyline, and with it, so too was the era of silent endurance. Because Danielle Moore wasn't just fixing systems anymore, she was dismantling legacies built on arrogance and ignorance. One accusation at a time. Ethan Caldwell hadn't moved from the couch in over an hour, but his entire life was already collapsing around him. The penthouse that once felt like a trophy of his accomplishments now pressed down like a steel vault, echoing with ghosts of every unchecked ego trip and every microaggression he had ever shrugged off as harmless. His baby son Leo whimpered softly in the background, but Ethan didn't rise. The sound no longer disturbed him. It haunted him. His phone buzzed again. Caller ID, Marcus Wright, his senior partner at Caldwell and Vail Technologies. Ethan answered with a cracked voice. Marcus! But the voice that came through was not one of camaraderie. It was panic wrapped in fury. Ethan, what the hell is going on? Marcus barked. I've had 3 reporters call me in the last 20 minutes. They're asking about your conduct, discrimination lawsuits, and something about a technician with recorded audio from your home. Ethan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He tried to form a sentence, but guilt was not fluent in denial. There's been a misunderstanding, he stammered. This woman, she's twisting things. You mean the woman who you falsely accused of theft, and who turned out to be a former private investigator? Marcus spat. Jesus, Ethan, this isn't just embarrassing. This is a goddamn nuclear bomb with your name etched into every wire. You don't understand? No, you don't understand. We're in the middle of finalizing a $38 million merger with a firm known for its progressive hiring policies. And now, your face is about to be splashed across national television as the poster boy for racial misconduct. Ethan stood up, stumbling over the edge of his Persian rug, knocking over a half-full glass of bourbon that splashed across polished marble like spilled secrets. What do I do?" he whispered. "Damage control?" "Too late for that," Marcus said coldly. "The board is calling an emergency session in the morning. You need to prepare yourself. And Ethan, if you've got anything left that even smells like decency, call that woman and apologize before this gets worse." Click. The line went dead. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. Across the room, Leo began to cry again, the high-pitched tremble slicing through the silence like an alarm bell ringing from inside Ethan's chest. For a moment, he just stared at the child, unsure how to move. But the baby's cries were relentless, unignorable, as if they were grieving not just discomfort, but the failure of fatherhood itself. Ethan approached hesitantly, picked up his son, tried to soothe him, but his hands were shaking. "Shh. It's okay, buddy," he mumbled, but Leo only screamed louder, arching his back away from his father's chest, as if instinctively rejecting the arms of the man who'd become a stranger even to himself. Ethan set him back down and backed away, defeated, when another buzz made his phone vibrate violently across the table. This time it was from an unknown number. Hesitation gave way to dread, and he answered. "Mr. Caldwell?" "This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 Investigative News," said a crisp, confident voice. "We are preparing an expose on workplace discrimination in the tech sector and have received recordings and supporting evidence regarding a recent incident at your residence. We would like your comment." This is confidential. It's private." "That recording wasn't authorized," Ethan sputtered. "On the contrary," Jennifer replied, unfazed. "Texas is a one-party consent state. Miss Danielle Moore recorded the entire interaction lawfully. We have audio of you using racially coded language, threatening an employee without proof, and dismissing a crying infant to pursue an accusation that turned out to be false. You were also recorded implying she was the type of person who always steals." "I didn't mean it that way," Ethan said, now pacing, heart hammering against his ribcage like fists on a locked door. "I have black employees. I donate to—" "Mr. Caldwell," the journalist interrupted. "We are airing the story at 7 p.m. This call is a courtesy. You're welcome to issue a formal statement. I'd suggest you do it soon." Another click, another silence. But this one didn't stay still. It vibrated across every surface of Ethan's luxury prison. The watch on his wrist suddenly felt too tight. The suit he hadn't changed since morning clung to him like guilt-soaked armor. At that exact moment, just a few miles away, Danielle Moore sat across from Dr. Patricia Williams in a private conference room atop one of Austin's most respected legal firms. A thick file sat between them, filled with photos, timestamps, audio transcriptions, and digital footprints. "You built a case before he even knew he'd committed the crime," Patricia said, impressed. "It wasn't a crime when I walked in," Danielle replied. "It was a pattern. I've seen this dance before. I just made sure the music never stopped playing." Patricia tapped the file. "Your recording is airtight, your credibility undeniable, and you did something the other women in his past cases couldn't." "I had proof," Danielle said, "and the confidence to use it." Patricia leaned forward. "And now you have a choice. File civil charges, go public, or both. Either way, you're changing the conversation in this city." Danielle looked out the window, the skyline glowing orange under the weight of dusk. "I don't just want to change the conversation," she said. "I want to change who gets to speak." Back in the penthouse, Ethan stared at his television in horror as Channel 7 began its special report. His name, his voice, his words, all of it, playing in surround sound for the entire city to hear. He tried to turn it off, but it was too late. The walls were already shaking, and this time there would be no smart system to shut it down. The TV screen flickered with the soft blue glow of Channel 7's primetime logo as Ethan Caldwell stood frozen in front of it. Not as a viewer, but as the unwilling star of what was about to become the most humiliating moment of his life. The segment began with a soft-spoken narrator. "Tonight, we investigate a pattern of workplace discrimination hidden behind the walls of one of Austin's most powerful tech firms. At the center, Ethan Caldwell, a man whose smart home revealed something far more human and far more dangerous." The screen cut to a sharp clip, audio, clear and unmistakable. Ethan's own voice dripping with venom. People like you think you can just walk into a house and take what you want. Then came Danielle's voice, unwavering. No, Mr. Caldwell. People like me walk into homes and fix what's broken. Sometimes even what's broken in the people. The reporters didn't pull punches. They laid out the facts in a calm but devastating cadence. Ethan had falsely accused Danielle Moore, a licensed smart tech specialist, of stealing a $4,000 headset. Surveillance footage proved he had dropped it himself. Police reports confirmed no wrongdoing on Danielle's part, but the story didn't stop there. On screen, photos appeared, old court filings, heavily redacted but authenticated, of 3 past employees, all women of color, who had filed lawsuits against Caldwell for racial misconduct, hostile workplace behavior, and public humiliation. All 3 cases had been settled with non-disclosure agreements. What's different this time? The reporter asked rhetorically. This time, the woman he underestimated had a plan. She recorded everything. Ethan staggered back into his armchair like he'd been punched in the chest. The next clip was of Danielle herself, seated at a press conference earlier that afternoon. Her curls were pinned back, her face composed, radiant, not angry, but resolute. This is not just about me, she said into the microphones. It's about every domestic worker, every technician, every woman of color who's been made to feel small, invisible, or replaceable in someone else's empire. Today, we remind the world, we're not anyone's shadow. We're the storm that follows the silence. The broadcast showed snippets of testimonials from other victims, even clips from a community protest forming outside Caldwell and Vale's headquarters. Hashtags were already trending. #Danielle Moore deserved justice, #industry truth, #Caldwell fallout. Then came the moment Ethan knew would cost him everything. Dr. Patricia Williams appeared on screen, the civil rights attorney who had successfully litigated some of the most high-profile discrimination cases in the country. This case is significant, she said, not just because of its clarity, but because of its documentation. Mr. Caldwell was caught not only abusing his position, but doing so in a way that exposed the very architecture of institutional bias. As the segment neared its end, a final montage rolled. Danielle walking past courthouse steps with reporters flashing cameras, standing next to Martinez reviewing evidence, then, finally sitting in a quiet park with Leo, the baby who had once screamed in isolation, but now, in her arms, giggled like he had known safety his whole life. That single clip, her holding Ethan's son, was the cruelest contrast of all. The anchor returned to the screen. Mr. Caldwell has not responded to our requests for an interview, but he'll have an opportunity soon, in court and in public opinion. Ethan slammed the remote down, but the TV didn't break. It just kept playing, the echo of his downfall reverberating in the room. At that exact moment, across town, Danielle stood in her small but dignified apartment, watching the broadcast end with her hands folded calmly in front of her. No champagne, no tears. Just a quiet exhale of truth finally released into the world. Carmen, her sister, sat on the couch beside her, wide-eyed. "You did it," she whispered. Danielle nodded. "No, we did." Every woman who stayed quiet out of fear, every man who watched and said nothing. Every moment I bit my tongue until it bled. This wasn't revenge, Carmen. This was balance. Her phone buzzed again, another email from a law firm requesting collaboration. Another message from a mother who had seen the report and thanked her for standing up. Another voicemail from a young black engineer saying, "Because of you, I spoke up today." Danielle didn't reply right away. She just stood by the window, watching the city breathe beneath her. The noise of traffic and headlines humming below like a giant beast finally stirred awake. Back in Ethan's penthouse, the silence was suffocating. The phone hadn't stopped vibrating for an hour, and now the board of directors was calling, again. The firm's logo had already been removed from the building's homepage. Anonymous employees were leaking emails, and Victoria, his estranged wife, sent a single text from Las Vegas. "My lawyer wants 50% of everything and full custody." Good luck explaining this to Leo in 10 years. Ethan dropped the phone. Not because of the money, not even because of the humiliation, but because deep down, he knew she was right. He would have to explain, to his son, to himself, how one smart, poised black woman had walked into his life, held up a mirror, and let the truth burn through every facade he had built. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, Ethan Caldwell awoke not to the sound of his infant son's cooing or the soft chime of his custom alarm system, but to the shrill ring of reality. It wasn't just one call. It was 17 missed ones, 4 voicemails, and an inbox bloated with the digital wreckage of a man's unraveling life. The firm had issued a formal statement. Caldwell and Vale has suspended Mr. Ethan Caldwell indefinitely pending internal and external investigations. His name had been removed from the website. His executive access badge had been deactivated. But worse than all of that, worse than the calls from attorneys, the radio silence from his wife, or the late-night emails from board members trying to distance themselves, was the coverage. Danielle Moore's story wasn't just trending. It had gone national. Smart technician becomes civil rights symbol after recording tech executive's false accusation. Former private investigator exposes systemic racism in corporate America. One woman's calm destroys a billion-dollar reputation. Her name was everywhere. LinkedIn articles, campus debates, think pieces, panel discussions. People who had never heard of her yesterday were now quoting her today. "We're not anyone's shadow. We're the storm that follows the silence." That line alone had been reposted over 80,000 times. Business schools were using it in ethics lectures. Corporate consultants were citing her case in discrimination training seminars. Ethan's jaw clenched every time he heard it. He couldn't escape her. Not online, not in conversation, not even in thought. Meanwhile, Danielle wasn't celebrating. She was building. In a modest but sun-drenched office overlooking Austin's downtown skyline, she sat at her new desk inside More Insight and Integrity, the newly formed investigative consulting firm she launched less than 24 hours after the broadcast aired. Funded by pro bono contributions from legal allies and civil rights organizations, her firm specialized in corporate audits, workplace discrimination probes, and protective policy drafting for laborers who worked in elite private homes and tech-adjacent roles. "We've got 7 client inquiries this morning alone," her assistant said breathlessly, "and 3 companies offering you 6-figure retainers." Danielle nodded, still typing. She didn't crave power. She respected momentum, and she knew when it was her time. "Tell them I'll respond once I've finished the tenant abuse case we took last week," she said. "No one gets bumped just because the camera showed up." The assistant grinned. "That's what they're going to love about you. You're not just the woman who beat Caldwell. You're the woman who never lost herself doing it." Danielle smiled gently. "Good, because that's the only story I care about telling." Across the city in a neighborhood that once would have never made it into Ethan's GPS, he sat in the back row of a public relations crisis seminar, unshaven, sleepless, and utterly lost. The facilitator clicked to a slide titled, "Case Study: What Happens When You Underestimate the Right Person." The screen filled with Danielle's face. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't ask questions. He just sat there, a living ghost watching his own legacy be dissected in fluorescent light. During a break, he overheard a woman at the snack table whisper, "Is that actually him in the back?" Another replied, "God, I hope not." What a fall. The conversation pierced deeper than the lawsuits. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. And Ethan Caldwell had never truly learned how to sit inside honesty. Not until now. Meanwhile, Danielle received another call from Dr. Patricia Williams herself. "You've become a symbol, Danielle. People are emailing me from 4 states asking how to get you to speak at their events." Danielle exhaled. "I'm not interested in becoming famous, Patricia. You're not famous. You're formidable. Even worse," she joked softly. "Then let's make it useful," Patricia replied. "There's a hearing next week. The Senate Subcommittee on Labor Ethics wants to hear directly from people with first-hand knowledge of domestic discrimination in the tech space." Danielle went quiet for a long moment, then, "Tell them I'll be there." By sunset, she was standing on a rooftop terrace watching the Austin skyline fade into gold. Her sister Carmen brought her a cup of tea. "You ever think," Carmen said gently, "how this all started with one man accusing you of stealing?" Danielle smiled, sipping slowly. "It didn't start there. It started years ago, when I saw women like Mom scrub floors while men threw accusations like ashtrays. When I heard my friends come home from nanny jobs with stories that made their voices crack. When I walked into homes where everything looked clean on the outside, but everything underneath was rotting." Carmen's eyes softened. "You're going to change things, Danny." Danielle looked out across the horizon. "I already did. and now I get to keep going. At that same moment, in a quiet grocery store on the far edge of the city, a man stood in the checkout line, gripping a basket of discounted items. The cashier didn't recognize him. Most people didn't anymore. But as he swiped his card, a TV mounted near the cereal aisle replayed a clip of Danielle Moore at a press conference. The volume was low, but the caption said it all. "The system isn't broken. It was built this way. We're just finally cracking it open." Ethan Caldwell looked up, and for the first time in his life, he nodded. Not in defeat, but in recognition. Because that woman, Danielle Moore, had once just been a technician in his house. And now, she was the name etched into every room he could never walk into again. 6 months later, the city of Austin had changed, but not as much as the woman who helped change it. Danielle Moore sat behind a wide mahogany desk on the 23rd floor of a building that used to house corporate lawyers and high-frequency traders. Now, the brass plaque on the glass wall read, "More insight and integrity, investigative solutions with purpose." Outside the window, the skyline glittered beneath a sky smeared with indigo and gold, but Danielle didn't notice the view. Her eyes were fixed on a young intern nervously presenting a report on a new corporate client suspected of discriminatory hiring. Danielle didn't interrupt. She listened, patiently, thoughtfully, only speaking when the intern paused to catch his breath. "Good," she said, tapping the tablet lightly. "But next time, don't just analyze what they did. Show me what they hid. That's where the truth lives." The intern nodded, eyes wide, scribbling notes like gospel. At that moment, her assistant's voice crackled softly over the intercom. "Miss Moore, Channel 7's Jennifer Walsh is here for your interview." Danielle stood, smoothed her blazer, and opened the door herself. Jennifer walked in with a smile that carried a memory. "You're taller than I remember," she teased. "You're just used to seeing me on the ground floor of injustice," Danielle replied with a grin. The two women shook hands and sat in the sunlit meeting room where cameras had already been discreetly placed. "So," Jennifer began, "Danielle Moore, technician turned civil rights firebrand, private investigator turned national figure. How does it feel to know your story helped pass new state legislation on protective recordings for domestic workers?" Danielle didn't hesitate. "It feels overdue, and it's just the beginning." "You've been called the quiet storm," Jennifer said, flipping through her notes, "because you never raised your voice, but still brought a giant to his knees." "It was never about taking someone down," Danielle said. "It was about standing up, so others could too. I didn't need revenge. I needed repair." Jennifer nodded, deeply moved. "Your firm now handles over 30 cases. You've personally trained 15 new investigators. 3 companies overhauled their HR and security protocols after your audits. You've even started a foundation for women of color in domestic labor. That's extraordinary." Danielle gave a small smile. "It's necessary. Power changes form. So must protection." Just then, her phone buzzed with a private message. She glanced at it. Unknown sender. Subject: "Thank you." Curious, she opened it. The message read, "I'm a junior black associate at a Fortune 500 firm. Last month, I was accused of insubordination after flagging bias. Your story gave me the courage to record my next meeting. That evidence saved my job. Thank you, Miss Moore. You're not just fighting for justice. You're teaching us how to fight." Danielle stared at the message for a long, quiet second. Jennifer noticed. "Another thank you?" "Yes," Danielle said softly, "and they're the ones that matter." Meanwhile, in a suburb 30 minutes away, Ethan Caldwell sat on a folding chair outside a strip mall office, where he now worked part-time as a tech consultant for a failing startup. He wore jeans that didn't quite fit and shoes that once gleamed but were now dulled with wear. He scrolled through his phone, not to check market trends, but to see if the job applications he'd sent to 3 mid-level companies had received a single response. None had. His name was still radioactive. His reputation? Reduced to a cautionary tale. "Don't be the next Caldwell" was now a phrase uttered in corporate DEI training seminars. A business school in Chicago had turned his story into a case study on executive misconduct and racial bias. His own son, Leo, now a toddler, barely remembered living in the penthouse. Ethan saw him only twice a month. Victoria had taken full custody, moved to Houston, and joined a nonprofit that partnered with Danielle's foundation. Sometimes, when Ethan visited Leo, he'd find the boy watching videos of Danielle speaking at schools, her voice calm and warm, telling children that bravery doesn't always look loud, but it always looks forward. One day, Leo had asked, "Daddy, why is that lady always on TV?" Ethan had no answer, not one that made sense to a child. But deep down, he knew. She was on TV because she was everything he hadn't been. Honest, prepared, unshakable. That afternoon, Danielle received a call from Dr. Patricia Williams. "You'll want to hear this," the lawyer said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Guess who applied to our compliance division this morning?" Danielle blinked. "You're kidding." "Nope. Ethan Caldwell, the man who once asked, 'What harm can a technician do?' now wants to join our ethics team." Danielle laughed for the first time in days. "Did he mention my name?" "He did. He said you taught him respect, the hard way." Danielle shook her head in wonder. Too late, but not untrue. "Do we respond?" Patricia asked. "Let him sit with that silence," Danielle said. "It's the only echo that ever teaches men like him." That night, as moonlight spilled over the glass edge of her office and the city pulsed with its usual hum, Danielle Moore leaned back in her chair, phone in hand, reading through another thank you from a woman in Boston, another message from a housekeeper in Oakland, another voice rising because hers once stood still. The measure of her success wasn't the skyline outside, or the salary, or even the lawsuits won. It was this: the sound of people who once stayed quiet, now speaking like thunder. And in that moment, she knew. This was never about a headset. It was always about a voice. 3 weeks later, under the hard white light of a packed federal courtroom in downtown Austin, Ethan Caldwell sat stiffly in a navy blue suit he could no longer afford, flanked by a visibly agitated legal team and a dozen empty seats where supporters used to sit. Across the aisle sat Danielle Moore, radiant in charcoal gray, surrounded by her counsel, her sister Carmen, and 2 of the 3 other women who had once accused Ethan of discrimination, women whose cases had been dismissed, silenced, buried under NDA paperwork and power plays. Not today. Today, their voices had legal standing. Today, they stood on Danielle's foundation. The judge entered briskly, gavel in hand, and the room stood still. This hearing is to determine whether the civil complaint filed by Miss Danielle Moore and supporting plaintiffs shall move forward in full under the Civil Rights Protection Act, Section 4B, the clerk read aloud. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but everyone knew the outside world was watching. The local news vans outside, the student protesters holding #justice for Danielle signs, the podcast hosts live, tweeting every development. Everyone wanted to know what would happen to the man who once stood at the top of a tech empire and fell because he underestimated a woman with quiet power. The proceedings began with Danielle's attorney, Dr. Patricia Williams, addressing the bench. Her voice was smooth, decisive, and surgical. "Your Honor, we are not simply here to discuss a lost headset. We are here because my client was accused, humiliated, and endangered because of a pattern, an entrenched behavior of racial profiling wrapped in professionalism and cloaked in arrogance." She laid out the timeline: the false accusation, the police involvement, the broadcasted humiliation, and the public smear campaign Ethan attempted before being confronted with irrefutable evidence. Then she pointed to the other women in the room. Maria, a former nanny, dismissed after being blamed for a missing bracelet later found in a laundry chute. Tasha, an office manager fired the same week she reported a hostile work environment. Each woman now willing to speak. Each woman no longer alone. Ethan's defense attempted to pivot. "My client acknowledges the incident with Miss Moore was mishandled," his lead attorney said, careful with every word. "But we argue that this was a one-time overreaction, not a pattern." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Counsel, are you suggesting that 3 previous lawsuits, all involving black women and false allegations, followed by a nationally broadcasted 4th incident, are unrelated?" The courtroom was silent. Ethan shrank slightly in his seat. Danielle didn't smile. She just sat, still, composed, unshaken, as she had from the beginning. She was called to the stand next. And the moment she raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth, the entire tone of the room shifted. "Miss Moore," the judge asked, "why did you begin recording your interactions with Mr. Caldwell?" Danielle's voice was soft, but not timid. "Because after years of walking into homes like his and seeing the same dismissive glances, the same suspicious tone whenever something went wrong, I realized no one was going to believe me unless I came with evidence already in my pocket." "So you anticipated being treated unfairly?" "No," she replied. "I recognized it." She recounted the day with photographic clarity. His tone, the accusation, the baby's cries, and the moment she realized that the truth wouldn't matter unless it could be proven. Her words were not angry, they were weight, and even the defense couldn't deny it. Then Patricia introduced the footage, audio recordings, surveillance timestamps, text messages Ethan had sent mid-investigation to his team, suggesting they flag this woman's name internally. This isn't just bias, Patricia told the court. This is premeditated professional sabotage. The judge recessed for deliberation, but everyone in the room already felt the verdict shifting in the air like pressure before a storm. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Danielle exited quietly through a side entrance, away from the cameras. She didn't want a photo. She wanted a result. And inside, Ethan sat staring at the wood grain of the table in front of him, the same way he had once stared at his tech dashboards, at performance charts, at graphs showing company growth. All illusions of control. Now, he saw nothing. When the judge returned, he didn't hesitate. The court finds sufficient cause to move forward with a full civil trial, he said. Additionally, we recommend that the Department of Labor open an independent investigation into Caldwell and Vail's employee practices. The gavel struck. Danielle stood, not in triumph, but in confirmation. The silence that followed wasn't still. It was stunned. And it was his turn to feel it. As reporters rushed to cover the decision, Ethan sat alone while his lawyers quietly packed their notes, avoiding his eyes. No one spoke to him. No one comforted him. And when he exited through the side hallway, shielded by a bodyguard he could barely afford, he passed by a poster taped to a wall. It showed Danielle's face and a single quote, "When people show you who they are, record it." He didn't tear it down. He didn't stop. He just kept walking, into a world that now knew exactly who he was. By the time Danielle Moore walked into the polished marble atrium of the U.S. Department of Labor's regional office in Washington, D.C., there were whispers, not just among interns, but among directors. They weren't whispering because she was famous, but because she had become impossible to ignore. Her name, once dismissed as that of a technician or a helper, now showed up on panel schedules, policy memos, and quiet strategy calls about reform. She had not arrived alone. Flanking her were two of the women who had once sat silently in NDAs, signed under duress, Maria and Tasha, now wearing tailored suits and walking with shoulders high. Patricia Williams walked ahead of them, like a general returning to a field she knew too well, holding a case file so thick it thudded when placed on the conference table. The deputy secretary, a middle-aged man in a gray tie with crow's feet etched by compromise, cleared his throat and gestured to the seats. "Miss Moore, Dr. Williams, we've reviewed the findings you submitted. The scale of the misconduct." He shook his head. "Frankly, it's disturbing. Your case has already set off ripples. Several firms tied to Caldwell and Vail are now freezing partnerships. One even pulled out of a major federal tech bid, citing ethical uncertainty." Danielle's voice, when she finally spoke, was velvet over steel. "That's what happens when the truth gets louder than the money." She didn't need to speak loudly. Her words held weight from living inside silence for too long. "We're not here for media wins," Patricia added. "We want legal infrastructure, protections for domestic workers in elite homes, standardized background checks for executives using NDAs to bury discrimination, and the ability for employees to record interactions without fear of retaliation." The room went quiet. The deputy secretary leaned back, exhaled, and nodded slowly. "You're not just asking for policy, Miss Moore. You're asking us to change the architecture." "Exactly," Danielle replied, "because this system wasn't built broken, it was built biased." Across the country, Ethan Caldwell watched that very press conference from a grimy tablet screen in a co-working space he now rented by the hour. His name was no longer on any building, website, or business card. The financial ruin had arrived quietly at first, clients dropping, sponsors withdrawing, his own board voting him out. Then came the personal collapse. His divorce finalized, his accounts frozen for legal holds, and his LinkedIn turned into a comment battlefield. Now he sat in anonymity, chewing on the dry edge of a tuna sandwich, while watching the woman he once tried to ruin redefine how corporate America treated people like her. He didn't rage, he didn't scream, he just stared. Because Danielle hadn't just survived him, she had risen beyond him, and now she was rewriting the ground beneath his feet. Meanwhile, in Austin, more insight and integrity had expanded into an entire floor of a restored downtown building. The new lobby bore a subtle but powerful bronze inscription behind the reception desk. Truth always arrives, sometimes in heels, sometimes with hard drives. Her team had grown to 42. Former housekeepers, assistants, nannies, techs, now retrained, rearmed with skills in investigation, negotiation, and litigation. She didn't build an army. She built resistance with resumes. That evening, Danielle sat with Carmen at their mother's old dining table, now repainted and placed in the center of Danielle's sleek kitchen. They ate in peace, interrupted only by one email, subject line, invitation to speak, Harvard Law School commencement. Carmen nearly dropped her glass. Harvard, Danielle chuckled. Yeah, want to come? You're asking if I want to watch my sister roast a room full of Ivy League legacies with one eyebrow raise? Absolutely. Danielle didn't gloat. She just smiled in quiet disbelief. Because the girl who once fixed wires in silence was now being asked to teach people how to hold a microphone. Across town, in a modest room above a small tech repair shop, Ethan opened his laptop, hesitated, then typed her name into a search bar again. Danielle Moore. The results exploded. Articles, TED Talk clips, podcast interviews, policy papers. One headline struck hardest. The woman who refused to apologize for making a man uncomfortable and changed labor law because of it. He sat back. For a moment, he hovered over the comment section. Then he typed just 6 words, I learned. But far too late. He didn't post it, he closed the laptop instead. Because some reckonings arrive in silence, and others arrive wearing a name badge, holding a tool bag, and walking straight into the heart of power. Uninvited, unstoppable, unforgettable. The grand auditorium at Harvard Law School had seen countless speeches, debates, and declarations over the years. But that afternoon, as the chandeliers hummed above rows of black gowns and crimson sashes, it held something different, something that didn't arrive in the voice of tradition, but in the footsteps of a woman who had once been dismissed as just the help. Danielle Moore stood at the podium in a slate gray suit, no teleprompter, no cue cards, only truth resting in her lungs like breath before a storm. The applause that welcomed her was thunderous but not performative. It was earned. Faculty nodded with real reverence. Students leaned forward with pens frozen mid-sentence, and in the back rows, Carmen wiped a quiet tear, already knowing how this moment would echo through their family for generations. Danielle looked out over the sea of faces, future judges, future CEOs, future power, and she began not with triumph, but with memory. 16 months ago, she said softly, I walked into a home in Austin to repair a malfunctioning smart home system. By the time I left, I had been accused of theft, publicly humiliated, and almost arrested. Not because I made a mistake, but because someone believed that people like me don't belong in rooms with power unless we're holding a mop or a manual. The auditorium was silent, not with indifference, but with weight. That day, she continued, I didn't raise my voice. I raised a recording device. And that decision didn't just protect me. It exposed everything he tried to hide, because power built on fear always trembles when truth stands still. Heads nodded. Professors exchanged glances. But Danielle wasn't here to retell the story everyone had read about. She was here to tell them what they had missed. This isn't just about a rich man and a technician, she said. This is about a system that punishes those who stay calm under fire and rewards those who light the match. It's about how often women of color are asked to prove their professionalism in spaces where others are assumed to have it by default. It's about labor you never see until it disrupts your illusion of control. She paused, letting it settle. When I was a private investigator in Jamaica, I learned how to look past what people say and focus on what they try to hide. That training saved my life when I came here. But most women don't have that option. Most women don't have the chance to fight back with documentation, legal teams, or media platforms. So today, I'm not speaking for the woman I was in that room. I'm speaking for every woman who didn't make it out. The audience held its breath. You will leave this school with the tools to change laws, she said, now looking straight into the eyes of the graduating class. But your real power will be determined by how you treat the people who clean your offices, deliver your files, or serve your lunch. Your integrity won't be measured by your credentials, but by the way you respond when no one's watching. A standing ovation erupted. Not delayed, not polite, but instant, like truth pulling people to their feet. Danielle didn't smile widely. She simply nodded, her chin steady, her presence undeniable. After the ceremony, dozens lined up to speak with her. Students, deans, even visiting dignitaries. But one person waited silently, near the back, unsure if he'd be recognized. Ethan Caldwell stood in a borrowed blazer, clutching a white envelope. When their eyes finally met, Danielle didn't flinch. She didn't approach him, but she didn't walk away either. He stepped forward, awkward but sincere, and handed her the envelope. "It's not for now," he said, voice raw. "It's just something I had to say, even if it doesn't matter." She held the envelope without opening it and said only, "It's never too late to be accountable, but it's never early enough to fix what silence costs." He nodded once, then turned and walked away, not just from her, but from the version of himself that had created the whole disaster. That evening, back in her office, Danielle opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter. "I thought I had everything, until I lost everything. I thought you were the threat. You turned out to be the teacher. I hope one day my son grows up to be defended by someone like you. Or, better yet, to listen to someone like you before he ever needs to be." There was no signature, just the final line. "You gave me the mirror I refused to look into." Danielle folded the letter, placed it in a drawer beside dozens of thank you notes, and turned to face her window. The city below pulsed with its usual rhythm, but tonight something had changed. Not in headlines, not in courtrooms, but in the quiet ripple of culture, of what now passed for unacceptable. Because when Danielle Moore stood at that podium, she didn't just speak her story. She passed the microphone to every woman still waiting in the wings. And the world, finally, had begun to listen. 6 months passed since Danielle Moore walked off the Harvard stage and into a new chapter of her life. Not just as a voice for justice, but as a builder of systems designed to protect those who had never been protected before. The walls of her office now bore the framed policies she had helped pass in 3 different states. Signatures of governors who once ignored her emails, now etched beneath her words. She had just returned from testifying before Congress, not as a victim, but as an expert witness on labor discrimination, and was met with standing ovations, not because she demanded them, but because she embodied everything the system claimed to champion: accountability, resilience, and reason sharpened by experience. Her foundation, Echo House, had opened 3 regional chapters supporting low-income domestic workers with legal aid, security training, and scholarships. At its ribbon-cutting ceremony in Atlanta, a young woman hugged Danielle tightly and whispered, "I stayed quiet for too long, but your voice woke mine up." It was that sentence, not the press interviews, not the accolades, not even the multi-million-dollar settlements she now negotiated on behalf of others, that stayed with Danielle through sleepless nights. Because what she had built wasn't just an organization. It was armor for those who had always stood in rooms unprotected. One fall morning, as golden light spilled into her downtown Austin office, Danielle received a message that made her pause. It was from Victoria Caldwell. The subject line read, "From a mother who now understands." Inside the message was a simple thank you. "Thank you for holding my ex-husband accountable when I was too afraid to speak. Thank you for protecting my son the way his father never did. And thank you for showing Leo that strength doesn't need to yell. It just needs to stand still when the storm comes." Danielle closed the laptop and looked out the window, watching sunlight reflect off the high-rise buildings that once held the names of men who had never learned to listen. Across town, Ethan Caldwell had finally started working again. Not as a founder, not as a CEO, but as a data entry contractor for a small environmental firm. He no longer gave orders. He took them. He no longer parked in VIP lots. He rode the bus with earbuds in, drowning out news segments that still occasionally replayed audio from the worst day of his life. He no longer lied to himself. In some strange, painful way, that was the start of healing. One evening, he sat with his son Leo at a modest park bench, watching other children race across the grass. "Daddy," Leo asked innocently, "is Miss Danielle a superhero?" Ethan hesitated, then replied with more honesty than he had ever used in his life. "She's what happens when someone tells the truth, even when no one wants to hear it." That night, he mailed a small check, an anonymous donation to Echo House, with no return address, no note, just the inscription: "Use this for someone who needs the power I once wasted." Meanwhile, Danielle received hundreds of letters just like it. Not from enemies, from transformed hearts, from former bosses, silent bystanders, and mothers who had once told their daughters to stay quiet. She didn't respond to all of them. She couldn't. But she read every word. Because they weren't really about her. They were proof that the ripple had reached the shore. At a university speaking engagement later that year, a student asked her, "Did you ever want to destroy him?" Danielle smiled gently. "No," she said. The best revenge was never revenge at all. It was becoming everything they said I couldn't be, and using that power to lift others with me. The room erupted in applause, but Danielle's expression remained steady. She had grown beyond the moment, beyond the courtroom, beyond the accusation. She was no longer the woman who walked into Ethan Caldwell's mansion to fix a malfunctioning system. She was the woman who walked out having rewired an entire country's conversation on race, labor, and dignity. That night, as she returned to her apartment, Carmen met her at the door holding a thick envelope. "From the mayor's office," her sister said. Inside was a sealed invitation. Danielle unfolded it slowly. The city of Austin is proud to award Danielle Moore with the Human Rights Torch for transformational justice. And below, in smaller font, for turning injustice into blueprint, silence into armor, and humiliation into law. She sat down quietly, the weight of the moment settling around her. Not heavy, not burdensome, but full. Full of every name no one ever heard, every worker who never filed a report, every voice that cracked before it could rise. They were with her now. All of them. She looked out her window one last time that evening and saw nothing but light. Reflected, refracted, unstoppable. And somewhere in the distance, a little boy named Leo pointed to her picture on a mural wall and said, "That's the woman who made it safe for people to tell the truth." His mother nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's right." And she didn't do it by fighting. She did it by standing, and never moving again. Danielle Moore didn't raise her voice. She raised the truth, and let it echo loud enough to shake boardrooms, courtrooms, and every room that once shut its doors on people like her. Her story reminds us, power doesn't always come with a title. Sometimes it walks in with a tool bag, holds a crying child, and calmly rewrites the rules. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, empowered, or awakened, don't let it stop here. Share it. Talk about it. And never stay silent when silence costs someone their dignity. This is BlackLens Stories, where we tell the truths the world tries to ignore. Like, subscribe, and join us for the next story that was never supposed to be told.